Well, I've got a few odd takes, but I
Well,
think nothing,
uh,
nothing that will bring upon us the rage of the internet. I think
like
I
I
feel
don't
pretty
know.
safe.
See, Matthew says that, but I'm a listener of the Back Page podcast, and I'm not sure. There's a lot of spicy takes in there.
Oh, we edit out the spiciest of them all. What you're hearing is very much the kind of the mild flavored version.
I mean, actually, like while we're on it, I would say that your podcast with Samuel as probably inspired this. I mean, Damiano doesn't even know that probably, but um,
Oh God,
I mean,
revelation.
we'll obviously we'll talk about that before we get into Ace Attorney, but um, yeah, it's so good. I don't know how
Oh, thank you.
you've both how you've both. It's such a good podcast in that it it's got it like hits the right tone of being like industry focused, but also like anyone can kind of join in and enjoy it. But for people like I grew up reading all the future magazines, so
Right.
you know, getting all that kind of future lore and
Yeah. So, I think the key to it for us was that we're very nostalgic for the time we were on magazines and wanted to talk about that stuff. Um, but the reason we loved being on those magazines were the games that were happening at the time. So, you know, if even if people weren't into the mags that we talk about a lot, that they were probably or hopefully into the games, and the mags are a kind of like a gateway into talking about very specifically 2006. So I don't really know when the proper cutoff is. Probably it's gonna like 'cause we both stopped working on mags about 2016, so I guess it'd be that 10-year period. So yeah, hope maybe that's why it kind of like ticks those boxes. We definitely have feedback where some people are like, "I wish these guys would shut up talking about magazines." Like, because it's quite neat. I mean, if you saw how many mags we actually sold in those days, the number of people who could actually be listening to the podcast who have actually read those mags, it seems unlikely that they align. They were Endgamer anyway, which was the mag I was on, was not really a big enterprise.
no, I mean, why don't you like? I mean, I guess say for the listeners, sort of a bit about your history because I know you're someone with a lot of strings to your bow. I mean, I don't really know how to describe you because you've been everywhere.
Uh, yeah, I mean, I've managed to do this like a long time without making, I would say, a massive mark. Is kind of what's defined my time in games journalism. That's mainly because I was a print journalist for 10 years, and then I went into I went into video weirdly. So I've never really been online. I'm not an online presence sort of personality, and I've never written for like one of the behemoth sites like an IGN or a GameSpot, which is really helps establish people. But yeah, I started in 2006 on Endgamer, which was an unofficial Nintendo magazine, part of a kind of a sort of lineage of magazines in the UK, which goes back to Superplay, which was a SNES mag, and then basically as each new Nintendo platform was released, the magazine would update. So it was Super Play, N64, NGC, and then Endgamer was the Wii era. So that's really my era of Nintendo that I was covering. And yeah, from there I went to official Nintendo magazine for the last couple of years of that, and then official Xbox magazine for the last couple of years of that. The running theme is that I join magazines and then they close.
Mysteriously.
Yeah. I've a good friend, Gav Murphy, who used to work at IGN as part of the video trilogy RKG, and he always affectionately refers to me as the closer, which is great. And whenever I announce I've got a new job, he'll like message and say, "Oh, you do realize you've hired the closer." So that's good. It's good that we can laugh about these things now. Uh,
Yeah, nice to know he's fighting your corner. I mean,
yeah. No, he's a lovely person. I think he's got my best interests at heart. Just doesn't want me to get too big headed, which is kind of impossible. So,
well, actually, I mean, following on from that, um, one you do the Electronic Wireless podcast, right? For Rock Band
Yes,
Shotgun?
yeah. I'm like Mr. Podcasts.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about how you tank magazines and that, you're somewhat of a figure of the uh, the before times to me. You kind of uh, brought the impending doom because like a couple of years ago, one of the last events I got to attend in person was EGX in the end of 2019, and that's where you recorded the podcast, the RPS podcast live with Catherine and Alice. And then straight after that, the pandemic happened. So
Yeah, I don't think that was because of our podcast at
I
EGX.
don't know. I mean,
I mean, it may not have been the best podcast ever, but it wasn't that bad. But I know what you mean. Like, it was quite weird going from like quite public stuff and being, I'm particularly on RPS because it had, it was closely tied with like EGX and Res, these big live events. So you actually had this quite kind of public outlet to kind of come and represent the outlet. To go from that into the plague times and emerge plague times, not really a games journalist anymore because I was made redundant from RPS during the pandemic because of COVID cutbacks, sadly. So that was quite weird. Like I sort of went in one thing, came out another. Still sort of feeling around in that space. Which is also partially why I did the podcast with Samuel, because we both just wanted an excuse to keep kind of one foot firmly in games, I guess.
right? Yeah. I mean, and you were talking about how you were pivoted to video over at RPS. How did that happen to go from print to video?
Yeah, so when I was on official Xbox magazine, I was actually asked to come and run the official Xbox YouTube channel, which was a bit like PlayStation Access, if you've heard of that, which is like the kind of in-house PlayStation thing. It's sort of run by a team of ex-journalists. That was actually with the Yogscast, the YouTube kind of creator group. They had the contract for that, and like a person I had formerly worked with invited me across, and I said I've never worked in video or YouTube before, but they were like, we want your editorial kind of, we know video, editorial, let's mix these things together. Massively in at the deep end, like did that channel for just under 2 years. Kind of not in a public way, like I wasn't a presenter on it. I was doing a lot of the writing, producing, kind of idea generation. But that's where I kind of learned how to do video, or I don't think you can really learn YouTube. You kind of have a rough idea of how it works and then like hold on for dear life and hope that like success comes out the other end. Like if there was a way to make it work, everyone would be a millionaire on YouTube, and they're not. So we did that, and then a little bit into that, I got asked by Graham Smith, who was editing RPS at the time. He said, "We've been trying to build a video team for like a couple of years now, and we've not managed to do it yet. And do you want to come over now that you've got a bit more of a kind of understanding of it?" And I went over there and kind of relaunched the channel because they had some stuff on there, the RPS YouTube channel was quite weird before I joined because they had like little patches where they really went for it, and they hired like some great writers to kind of create kind of self-contained sort of series on things. There's also like a weirdly popular XCOM video of a guy doing like Alec Meir, one of the former writers on RPS, doing this incredibly long turn in one of the XCOM 2 DLCs. And it's just like, it's always one of the best performing videos. Like even when I was on the channel making new stuff, I was always competing with this one video from like 5 years ago, which Alec he wasn't like a video guy. He had a really bad mic. So he's kind of whispering like his what he's doing over the top. It's got a really creepy energy, and it sort of, we were doing always quite high production value stuff or higher production value stuff. And you're like, why can't we dethrone this terrible video from 5 years ago? But
From
you know,
ASMR, basically.
yeah, I think it was. Yeah, like all the comments are like this weird whispering tactical genius.
Well, the internet's like that, isn't it? Right? It's just strange, like the things that take off.
Yeah.
It's always
Yeah,
the worst thing somehow. Yeah.
yeah.
But I mean, okay. I suppose we should probably talk about Ace Attorney now, right? I mean, that's why we're here. Damiani, do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Well, how can I make justice to it? Justice. My first introduction to the series personally was back in 2005, 2006, around that time. Because I had never played anything like a visual novel. I mean, I wouldn't really call Phoenix Wright the series a visual novel, but it's got elements of visual novel for sure. Still, I never played anything of the sorts, and I was looking for something different on the Nintendo DS, and I don't remember if someone recommended it to me. I read it somewhere. I don't remember now, but I think I bought it just like randomly from a used shop because it was cheap, and I immediately clicked with it. I mean, maybe it was also because I was studying law at the time.
Oh.
Though likely I never became an attorney because in Italy that would have been a nightmare. Yeah, music because we got a bit of a connection, me and Phoenix at the time. So I clicked with it, and then I just plowed through the series, the original trilogy. At the time, I think, yeah, it was just the original trilogy on the DS, and of course, on the GBA. But yeah, I don't think that came out of Japan. At least I don't think so. But yeah, that was my approach, and basically, yes, I just stuck with the series since then. I mean, ups and downs, of course, but yeah, I just loved it since day one. What about you, Matthew? When did you first meet our lawyer friend?
Yeah, I mean, I only finally bought a DS when I got the job on the Nintendo Mag. Like, I got the phone call, you've got the job, and to celebrate, I went into town and bought myself a DS Lite because I thought, well, I'm going to need one, and also like, let's do it, let's push the boat out. And yeah, I got two games. I got Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow, I want to say, and yeah, the first Ace Attorney, which I'd read about in the mags, but like I said, never had the platform to play it. Always a big fan of like point and click adventure games, and could kind of see the kind of this felt like a sort of version of that. Also just was intrigued by the whole. This is kind of a lawyer game from Capcom, who make quite traditional kind of at that point. I associated them with the quite traditional kind of action games and fighting games, and I loved Capcom's whole kind of aesthetic and deal, and seeing those two things come together was really exciting. And yeah, it coincided with starting on the mag, and there's just been so many of these games. Basically, I was writing about them throughout my career. It's been like the one through line. I think I've probably reviewed them all except for the first one, and so yeah, always looking forward to the next one. Kind of was just obsessed with it. Like it was like my thing in those mags. I'd always sort of shout about it. Eventually, when I was editing official Nintendo magazine, I finally got to do an Ace Attorney cover, which was actually for Leighton versus Wright, the crossover game. But we could never have put Ace Attorney on the cover of Endgame. Like it was just too niche, too small fry. But towards the end of O&M's life, I think there were like fewer eyes on the mag of what we were doing, so we were. I always say like I should have seen that as like the writing on the wall, but that like maybe our days were numbered, because you're like, I'd really like to do this, and they're like, yeah, sure, and you're like, okay, that was weirdly easy.
Yeah, I feel that overall the Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney series has always lived in that kind of niche in games, but it's always really been there. I mean, in Japan it's pretty big, perhaps bigger than over here in the West. Maybe I would say yes. There's been the anime series, and I also remember a musical like years ago.
Right, yeah.
That was interesting. But yeah, it's always got a very dedicated fan base, I would say. So there's always been that kind of attention on each title, and
Yeah, it's kind of wild, I think, that, and one of the reasons I really love this series is that because it has lasted this long, the idea that, if you look at what Capcom make as a company, they've really boiled their thing down to a couple, they're like Monster Hunter, Resident Evil, and Street Fighter, and which are like massive, massive series, and also these lawyer games. And the idea of that sitting alongside those things and lasting all this time, I mean, I guess it speaks to, the core, that the niche is sort of strong enough to kind of sustain it. But I love their kind of commitment to the idea and the fact that they have basically a small department of like weirdos working on these games the whole time. It's really super endearing, and just like that sort of like that they have this kind of through line there, and they're always sort of working this thing. There's not really a lot else like it. Like, there's lots of companies which have been built around visual novels or work exclusively in that space, but for them to have been doing it for so long, I just admire the dedication to the idea. You feel like someone powerful at Capcom is themselves like really into it, and I don't know if it's like a bit of a vanity project or something at this point, but yeah, I just it's like weirdly reassuring. It's like the weirdest thing a AAA like developer makes, I think.
yeah, it's true. And now we come to one of my earliest hot take on the series. I mean, I don't know if it's an hot take, but yeah, I mean,
I'm readying myself.
If one is a fan, you might not be that happy about it, but okay. So when I play the original trilogy, you get a real sense of accomplishment. Now we're not gonna spoil the end of the trilogy because just is yet to play the third game, but yeah, you get a story that feels complete, doesn't really need something added to it, which makes sense. That's the kind of story you'd want as a writer in your game, especially in a trilogy. So on one hand, I liked what the direction they went with for Apollo Justice, in that goes in a different direction. It shows like what happens many years later than the trilogy, so it doesn't do the old prequel thing, the tired prequel idea, or just the immediate sequel. It goes in a different direction. I like the idea, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I have an idea, but after the original trilogy, I think the series went kind of downhill for quite a while. Even Apollo Justice is what I didn't really connect with. Especially the ending was ultra weird. That kind of weird political note that they ended on, and that was kind of a cliffhanger ending, and that it has no resolution because I don't think they're going to go back to that. So that's going to be forever cliffhanger ending. But yeah, even with the very latest title, with everyone raving about it, has got great reviews, and I think it's a solid title. I mean, don't get me wrong, but I still don't think it compares to the original trilogy. So my hot take is that after the original trilogy,
When you say the latest, do you mean like Ace Attorney 6 Spirit of Justice, or do you mean like the Victorian one, the Great Ace Attorney?
Yeah, I in this case, yes, I mean the Victorian one, because
okay.
Spirit of Justice, I remember really nothing. I mean, I'm sure I played it, but it's gone. So, woof.
Oh, you see, well, like my hot take is I love Spirit of Justice. Like Spirit of Justice is like way up there for me. Like I think it's almost as good as the original trilogy. But I kind of agree with you on like Apollo Justice and Dual Destinies after it. I think there was like a changing of the guard at Capcom, and the original creator Shutakumi kind of he's involved with Apollo Justice, but he isn't involved with the series after that, and you can tell like there's a change of like writer, tone, voice, like the characters aren't quite right. But weirdly, I think Spirit of Justice, like, it has its own voice. Like, I really loved the I just love what they did with the characters in that game. I really like the kind of gimmick. There's like this gimmick called a divination seance where you can see like a character's like final seconds through their eyes, and it's sort of submitted as evidence, and you have to kind of work out the contradictions in that. In a series which has tried lots of gimmicks to try and like sort of spice up the courtroom scenes, it's the one which kind of landed for me. So I like that. I loved Ace Attorney as well, the Victorian one. Like, very, very different. And I find like it's maybe like tied to the fact that, you know, the Victorian one was again written by the original creator Shu Takumi. I felt like the series is back in his hands. I'm almost like as big a Shu Takumi fanboy as I am an Ace Attorney fanboy. So I was just like, you know, I was willing it to be good, and maybe that's part of it. You know, you're like, I refuse to believe that he hasn't got it anymore. And like, I like the whole Sherlock Holmes thing as well. Like, I thought that was really fun. The kind of the mixing in with that. I mean, it's definitely more of an acquired taste. And like right after I played it, I thought it was one of the best. I was just like, God, I love that game so much. And like with a little bit of distance, it maybe sits lower in my rankings now, but I still loved like the music and the production values, and you know, had some really wild characters and twists in it. Bit overlong is the only thing. Like it's I maybe like 10 hours too long, which is quite a chunk. But yeah, I mean, I would say, like, you know, you say it was a sort of hot take, but one of the things I do love about this series is that you ask fans, you know, most people who are fans of this series have played every single one, and most people will rank them differently. And, you know, I like that, like, different elements of them speak to, you know, certain characters speak to certain people. Like, I like the quality of the mysteries. You know, I think some of them, the actual mysteries are a bit weaker, and that affects my rankings quite heavily. But yeah, I don't think there's anything. I don't think that's an evil take.
No, I hope not.
But Spirit of Justice that's good.
You mentioned that you're a Shu Takumi fan. Have you ever had a run-in with him over the years, or?
I've done several like email interviews with him, which isn't very exciting to say, you know, because you're like, well, so what? But he's also like, he's amazing at email interviews. I mean, I sent him off questions, and I mean, like, no joke, he sent me back about like 10,000 words of answers. I mean, he's just, because I think he's just there in a room, not like basically waiting to get to make the next Ace Attorney game, I guess. And he just wrote and wrote and wrote, and he's got or what I took from his answers is he's got an amazing memory for the series, and I think it was quite a small team, almost like indie spirited, like within Capcom, and he's got a story about every element of the game. Like, his fingerprints are on everything. He isn't you know, I just step back and ask this to happen. You know, he can tell you why this particular track is like it. You know, I could ask him about very specific story twists, and he would explain in detail, like, the exact thought process that kind of took him there. And I think he talks more like a writer in terms of, you know, he's like an author for, like, I think he loved crime mystery, and this manifests in these games. So he has that kind of like incredible, like, just level of a detail that's gone into his writing. I think he just remembers all that. His passion for like every element of it is really clear. So, you know, those were like two highlights of my career, were just getting these answers back and being like, oh, this is just like a treasure trove. Like, you know, I can't believe it. I mean, he's like genuinely like revealed stuff that was never known about these games before, and it's like the only time I've ever felt like I've like had that in an interview. That's mainly because I suck at interviews. That's nothing to do with developers. But I met him once, but like not in a journalistic capacity. I actually went on holiday to Comic-Con over in San Diego, and just as a tourist, and I was walking around the show floor, and I saw him, and he was there to promote Ghost Trick at the time for Capcom. And I said to my friend, I was like, "Holy shit! Like, this is like my favorite game developer is like right here." But I can't speak Japanese, and what I did was I actually I followed him around Comic Con, trying to work out who in his group was the translator, and it wasn't like for hours. It wasn't like creepy, but like he went into this thing. They were buying something. I could see someone doing the translating for him at the till, and I went up to him. I was like, "This is going to sound really crazy, but like, I know this is Shu Takumi. I'm a huge fan. Like, I'd just love to say hello to him and like get a photo or whatever." And so the guy did a little translation. He seemed quite sort of confused. The idea of, I don't know, it being recognized. Like, I think he's quite a sort of humble character. I don't think he sort of imagines himself to have this kind of celebrity. So yeah, I've got this photo of me with Shu Takumi at Comic-Con. Him politely putting on an awkward smile. Me absolutely like, this is heaven. But I'd love to, more than anything, if I could make one interview happen, it would be like in person. I'd love to talk to him. One of my sort of hobbies outside of games is Japanese crime fiction. I read a lot of it in like translation. I'm a real like fiend for it. Partly because of Ace Attorney, actually, because it's part of a tradition which is slightly different to our crime writing in the West, and I feel like I know that he's into a lot of this stuff as well. I sound like a real stalker, I know, and I feel like I could have a really like great conversation about that stuff with him. So yeah, I would love that to happen. I've pitched to like Edge magazine a couple of times, like, why don't we do one of those career retrospectives on Shu Takumi? And they're like, why? Like, the problem with Shu Takumi is like every game is Ace Attorney, apart from like, well, that's a like, most of them are Ace Attorney, and they want a bit more variety, I think. But like, I don't know. We can talk about Dino Crisis, Ghost Trick. They're a bit different.
No, I know the feeling. Like, yeah, trying to like pitch it as like, just a nice profile piece on someone, or I think it'd be really interesting. And really, you just kind of want to get in a room with them and ask them like, your
100%. That's what I want.
I've been stalking this guy for some time. I mean, I've been a fan of him for.
Yeah.
I can say it now. I mean, it's not happening till next week, but by the time the podcast goes up, I have an interview with Jeff Keighley arranged, right? And this whole thing is like pitched like, oh, we'll talk about this and we'll talk about it, but really, I'm just actually, the only thing I want to find out is who dresses him, right? Like, I want to know how he ends up on stage in like all of that stuff, because does he pick that outfit? Does somebody dress him? And it's just like, it all came out of this tiny little, kernel of interest. So,
yeah, fascinating. What secrets lie in his wardrobe?
I've called it Keighley chic so far. So. Oh no!
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. But so I know exactly where you're coming from. I just love this idea that you followed Shu Takumi all around Comic-Con.
Yeah. It's a bit weird. But that's what love makes us do crazy things.
Oh no.
Well, going back to the topic, I would like actually to Matthew to have your opinion on what we mentioned before briefly, which is the Phoenix Wright crossover with Professor Layton, which I've seen a couple of videos on the story on how that whole idea came about, and it's really fascinating because it's almost by accident. It's almost a clash of very different kind of gameplays as well, and if one really pauses and thinks about it, it's something that it's still kind of weird. I mean, I remember when they announced it, I was like, wait, what? I thought it was like a DLC, something like that, but it was a real standalone game. And my kind of lukewarm hot take is that they brought some very good writing for the Phoenix Wright, at least part of the story. I love this so much. I mean, it's one of the very few Ace Attorney titles after the trilogy, the original trilogy, where I felt emotional. I really felt emotions. I mean, the others are more fun. There's emotions, but not real big things. There's kind of a couple of very dramatic pieces, and I love them a lot. So, would like to know your opinion on that game.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's cool. I'm glad that you like dig it as well. It's like I feel like one which most people are down on. If there's one they're really down on, it's that, because like maybe they aren't super into the Layton stuff, or they're just sort of resent like that it's kind of half an Ace Attorney game. I mean, from like a sort of mechanical perspective, I love that game because like the investigation portion of Ace Attorney is kind of my least favorite bit of it. You know, I love the courtroom drama. I love making all the accusations. The actually kind of plodding around in between, like it's important and there's good characters, but it's it isn't the best bit. Where here obviously replaced it with the Layton sections, which are like a Layton game, which I really loved. So I like that balance. But yeah, in terms of like what I loved about the writing was that, and again, it was a Shu Takumi story, is that I think he really like elegantly took the characters and energy of Phoenix Wright and the kind of ideas you'd explore in a Layton game. The fact that it is slightly more kind of supernatural, there appears to be magic involved, and kind of takes that very logical world of Phoenix Wright and the kind of more out there kind of thinking of Layton and kind of crushes them together, and like both characters like learn something from the other, about their kind of approach to things. I think that's like really, really well handled. Just from a kind of, I mean, the main reason I love it is really just from like the fan service kind of element of it, of seeing kind of, I love these two characters. What happens when they just kind of interact? What do they have to say to each other? Like, it's quite odd that they like visually they're almost different species. If like Phoenix Wright has like proper eyes and Professor Layton just has like dots, and like it's just very odd seeing these two things, and like they tweak both art styles to bring them together, but they're still clearly of like different worlds, and I love all that. I think the way the composer takes like the classic Phoenix Wright tunes but plays them with like the Professor Layton kind of orchestra, like the accordions and violins. It's like one of the greatest soundtracks in this series, and like however good or bad the individual games are, like their soundtracks are like bangers from like wall to wall. So there's a lot of competition in there. So yeah, like for me, it was really more about like the art of combining those two worlds and doing it so well, and kind of sort of paying tribute to the best of both of them. It just I remember playing it in the office because we did it. The cover issue was like the review issue, and it's when you're playing something and you're like, this is so tuned into my wavelength. Like I'm so this is so my jam that I almost had to like look around. You want to look around and like drag other people into it when you're on a handheld. I'd sometimes, and those are the games they've really like got you, where you're like, oh man, like I can't wait for other people to see this. This is so rad, like how it treats these characters. And then when it did come out, like most of my friends were like, I hated that game. And it was like, well, it wasn't for you anyway, Philistines.
It's for real fans.
Yeah, well, I don't know. See, the real fans would say, oh, it's Layton, it's not for... I don't know. It's a weird one, but I love it.
Yeah, I think it can. In the end, it came out pretty okay. I mean, I've heard that the developers do not really have that fond memories of working on it. They're not crazy about the idea, so there's not probably going to be another experiment like that.
Yeah,
at least
sadly.
soon.
Yeah.
Sadly, yes. But I mean, for me, I went in. I don't even remember if I read the reviews, but I wasn't not expecting really anything. I mean, for me, it also clicked the two different gameplay mechanics, because I always felt that while I liked the puzzles in Layton, they lacked some kind of punch, some kind of something else to go along with them. I mean, they were fine on their own, but they were basically all it was. I mean, there's a story, of course, but I always felt it was missing something. So going along, so mixing that with the cultural drama, I think was pretty good idea, gameplay wise. But yeah, went in expecting basically nothing. I mean, expecting to be bored or something like that. But in the end, I was like, wow, this is pretty good. It was one of the one of the games I remember the most after the original trilogy.
Right, that's cool.
Revisit very gladly. Maybe I'll actually do that.
It's the one which is like going to be the hardest to play in future because it only exists on 3DS. It hasn't been re-released on anything.
Yeah.
Like buying a physical copy on 3DS, good luck. It is so expensive secondhand now. Like with the digital store closing, like it's gonna be kind of quite a precious artifact. I mean, like it's still full price. If you want to buy it on the digital store on 3DS, it's like 40 quid, which is a bit eye-watering. But like, I don't know, for a lot of people haven't tried it, haven't played it, and they're not really going to get a chance to kind of fix that as well. Like the rest of the series, relatively, is quite easy to get hold of. The main events, I would say, are they've re-released HD versions and things, and there are Android versions of the other 3DS games. But this one is like, it's kind of. Yeah, it's sort of sad. It should be out there more. I think it's probably because of the Layton license and all that jazz. But the other thing I really love about this one is because Nintendo published it. They did, they used to do those Iwata Asks interviews where the president of Nintendo would like interview internal development teams or whatever about their games. And there's quite a nice one where it's Iwata interviewing Shu Takumi and his surname's Hino. I can't remember his first name, but he's the president of Level 5 who made Layton. And it's just the three of them being like nerdy about detective games and mystery games. And like in like my magazine past, kind of probably my three idols were Iwata, Takumi, and Hino. And to see them together in this little thing, again, it just... super fan servicey. I mean, I'm so glad they localized it. Like, they could have just very easily have not done that. So yeah, just I don't know. To like Layton as well. Like, they were just both really important series. If you were working on a magazine, like after 2006, there was a Layton every 2 years as well. Like, they were just part of our life in quite a big way. So yeah, that's probably why it means more to me than some others, I would guess.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of games that did not come out in the West, what did you think of the investigations parallel series? I played both. The second one with the English patch, which was okay. Overall, I felt that they felt kind of superfluous. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, they were not bad games at all. I think they fit pretty okay with in the series, but it's that kind of games, that kind of stories that really felt like kind of that. Let's release that. Let's release those games while there's still a bit of interest in the series, so I'd like to cash in a bit. So I don't mean that even that in a bad way. It's not like they don't have heart or soul. I mean, they're okay games, but they felt a bit superfluous.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. I was dreading you saying I played the patch translation of Ace Investigations 2 and it's my favourite. Because there are lots of people who do say that, and I don't know if it's like... I think it's partly because it's kind of slightly exotic and out of bounds, It's like, well, I had to buy it and then patch it and da-da-da-da, and I get that. I'm not crazy about either of them. I think 2 is much better than 1. I think the problem I have with them is I love Miles Edgeworth in the original trilogy. He's a super important character, and I can understand why when you come out of that trilogy, you might think, oh, I'd love to play a game about Miles Edgeworth. He was so cool when he was like my enemy and everything, and he succeeds in that role. He is your antagonist. He's interesting because he's like sneers at you. He goes on this bit of emotional arc, across the 3 games. But you get him in like small doses. He has this, this antagonistic role to serve. The problem in the Ace Attorney games is when he becomes the hero, I think they actually like really water him down, like in the investigations, because they're trying to make him a bit softer and a bit nicer, and you don't get to play as like the mega asshole who you fought in those games. He's a bit nicer to Gumshoe. There are other villains. Also, I've banged on about this before, but I have a real problem with the setup of this game in that you're not in court anymore, making your case. So you basically go to crime scenes, you identify who you think is the killer, and you're a prosecutor, so your job is to accuse people of being the killer, and you're like, it's you. You murdered this person. And then that person gets to say to you, well, prove it to me. And you're like, that isn't how this works. Like, I'm a prosecutor. Like, this is where we should go to court, and then I prove it. Like, I have to prove it to the judge, not the criminal. And it never worked for me. I was just really thrown out of it, in that it's you arguing with like a load of weirdos about why you think they're guilty, and it lacked the drama. Like, the weird thing about Ace Attorney is, even though they repeat it again and again, I think the courtroom has this amazing dramatic charge to it. You're really invested, and whether that's like the health bar that's going down, or just the way they're like, this is it, everything's on the line, and the music's thrumming, and you're really into it. And it just, outside of that setting, it just doesn't have that like spark of drama at all. I think it's like a really like flawed misunderstanding of what made those games great. And you're right, I'm glad you said that, because I've heard so many people are like, boo, 2's the best. I'm like, it's just too flawed. But I shouldn't get so angry about a game which doesn't even get released over here. It's really dumb. There's one thing in 2 that I really like, which is one of the cases is in a set in like a prison, and in the prison you meet some of the people you've sent to jail in the previous games.
Yeah.
Which, as a bit of fan service, awesome. That's really cool. But the other thing is, in the prison, to kind of keep all the prisoners sedate, they pair everyone with like a sort of therapy animal. So there's all these like, it's like a petting zoo / prison, which I think is such an amazing like Ace Attorney idea of like, it's like, of course the prison in the Ace Attorney universe would be really weird as well. That I've got a lot of time for, but the rest of it, not so much.
I think you brought up a good point about the courtroom and just the kind of how it's central to the series. But it's such a strange beast, right? Because the courtroom in some respects is really like logical and scientific, and you have to prove things. But then on the other side, it's just like a complete kangaroo court, and like people will stand up and say things, and it's like
the judge changes the
like,
minds.
Why is the judge astonished by this man's opinion? But there is something like that just creates tension, despite that it is just silly, right? With like garish anime characters, but there is also something where you're like, oh my god, I need to see what happens.
Yeah, that's the magic of it. I think it's in the courtroom where like the Capcom connection feels like, I'm not saying it's like a fighting game, because it's arbitrarily got like the health bar and everything, but it has the like energy of like a, when you crack someone's logic, they react like they've taken a punch, and like their hair explodes and they all get despair. I think there is like a bit of the craft, or whatever they like learn about making like sprite-based games feel really nice, on the NES and the SNES. Like, that craft is at Capcom, and it's in this game. Like, it has, for a text-driven game, like, it relies on a lot of arcade tricks that I think, super work in those situations. And, like, I'm almost a little bit sad that they've kind of moved away from that art to, like, 3D models. I still, they're beautifully made games, but I'd love to see them really, like, pump, like, a modern budget into that kind of, you see how beautiful sprite art is the what people can do in like other indie games or whatever, many different things. And yeah, I'd love to get back to that. Just one time, just really like just go for it. Super indulgent, like big vanity sprite project.
Yeah, 100% agree. And that's why I'm a bit sad that there's not like like the special editions of Secret of Monkey Island or the other LucasArts games where you can switch on the fly
Right.
between the old art and new
Yeah.
art on the new trilogy, the HD trilogy, because the art for me is a bit too clean.
Yeah, it's weird. Some of the characters look quite unpleasant in the new style, but they make perfect sense. And like, I don't know the science of it. You think surely you could scale this stuff up? I mean, they are, the sprites are there, and yeah, I don't know. That's sad.
Yeah. So I still think the best way, but yeah, now it's become more and more difficult. Yeah, the best way to play the original trilogy is back on the old DS with with the cards. But yeah, now it's become quite difficult.
Jesse, you said you were playing through these yourself at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Are you enjoying the series?
I am. I'm really surprised by how well it holds up all these years later on a modern sort. After playing so many other games.
Right.
And Damiano recommended it, and I thought, I suppose I'll finally pick it up in a sale. And there's just something about it. It has just such a charm you don't really see much anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it gets a bit. We've talked a bit before. Like the last episode that they reintroduced with the HD collection is very strange. It takes like a weird turn because it. What was it, Damiano? It wasn't included originally. It was
Jesse's talking about the episode that was not in the original Game Boy Advance. First title was added on the DS to to use all the stuff. So it doesn't make really much sense now that on the Switch or on PC, of course, there's no microphone, there's no touch screen. So yeah, it wasn't. It's You see it that it's kind of a DLC last minute thing. I mean, the story is okay, but it's not on par with the rest of the game. So yeah, the Jesse was a bit turned off by that. Also because it's very long, right, Jesse? I mean,
that episode is so long.
Yeah, they're long old games.
Yeah, I can already see partway into the second one, and when you first start off, you think, okay, this is kind of generic, but then you see the characters start sort of building up, and then seeing how they fit together, and like you talk about Miles Edgeworth, and when I first met him, I just thought, I hate this guy so much. But then like you just start to see chinks in his armor and see how he actually becomes quite human and relatable. And
it was. I mean, there's a lot of that kind of serialized storytelling in games now, and there's plenty of other series where characters go through multiple iterations or whatever. But I think this was definitely like, for me, an earlier example of something where, like, by the third game, there were so many payoffs to everything in the first two games, and all these callbacks, and these characters came back, and like it really had the energy of like just a great TV box set where it felt like super planned. And that was one of the amazing things when I was in the few email interviews I've done, is how like not planned it was. He really like winged it every time, and it's like you'd think it's one of the most densely, tightly conceived trilogies ever. I mean, I think it really is like so beautifully executed at the end, and there's some big emotional callbacks to stuff that happened earlier, and for him to have like not planned that in advance and just like worked it out and made it work. I mean, he's like clearly a super gifted storyteller, and maybe to your point about like the following games being a bit lesser, maybe it's just because you don't, when you come out of those three games with their connections, and then he leaves the series, and then all of a sudden you've got other people coming in and doing it. Like, the next three games don't have any of those kind of connections at all, really. I mean, I think I like Spirit of Justice because the self-contained story I think is pretty good, and there's some really good twists in it. But yeah, I would love them to commit to another like proper arc again. But whether there's like another 3 Ace Attorney games like in them, I have no idea.
Now we come to an interesting point about the movie, which I'm sure you've seen, Matthew. I mean, as a fan, you had to see the movie adaptation. As for me, I always call it like the best video game adaptation, at least that I've seen. I've seen many, but that, of course, that doesn't mean it's a good movie per se.
Right.
I'm a fan of Takashi Miike, the director, but yeah, he's a lot of hit and miss. He's a really hot and miss guy. I mean, when he hits, he really hits. Like, I love his Yataman take. That was pretty a lot of fun, and Zebra Man also is great fun, and blah blah blah. But yeah, Ace Attorney is probably like the movie for the fans, really. Because I mean, most fans would be mostly happy with the way he's portrayed the characters. I mean, he hasn't done really big, sayings that people would say, "Oh no, this character doesn't look." Maybe there's a couple of characters that don't have enough space. That's true, but there's no real, huge problem with the story. I mean, it just basically sticks to the original trilogy, like a couple of episodes in, like I think the first and the last, basically, but the first 2 and the last. But yeah, I mean, if you're not a fan, if you're not familiar with Ace Attorney, I think you would find it.
I think that's fair. I mean, it's like it's more of a kind of like oddity to go like you can watch it and go, oh, it's that, and you can make the connections and you can see how they've done it. I mean, I still think there is a much better film to be made of Ace Attorney. Like. There's some of they do some of the kind of explosive kind of visual style, and I think it's in that film where they have it where they sort of throw the evidence and it's sort of like they're almost like holograms and they kind of whiz across the court at each other. Yeah. That's okay. I mean, I would love. Yeah, I was quite excited for it. I kind of liked it. But like you say. In the pantheon of video game adaptations, I mean, yeah, it's up there. Congrats to him for making you are the best 3-star film.
Yeah, it doesn't say much when you're is one of the best video game adaptations out there. Just means it's watchable. Yeah.
I actually haven't watched the anime of this. So, have you watched that?
I've tried, but I have to confess I clocked out 4 or 5 episodes in. I mean, you mentioned that, and I feel the same, that sometimes the Phoenix Wright games get a little bit overlong and, a bit talky. There's a bit too much description and talks when you say, okay, I get it, let's skip ahead. But I think it's kind of a typical Japanese visual novel sin. I mean, I have played since then, since when I told that I never played a visual novel. I played now a lot, and yeah, that you get that kind of long description and long dialogues when you're like, okay, let's skip to the next narrative point, please. I think the anime series really, I don't know why, but of all the different things they could focus on, they focus on the talk. The talk really long dialogues and conversations. So it's not great animation. The dialogues get a bit lost, and so I got a bit bored, frankly, and I clocked out. That doesn't mean it's bad. I mean, perhaps I wasn't just in the right mindset. I have a bit of a complicated relationship with the anime series, especially. If I'm not in the right mood, I just clock out. Even if it's like Evangelion, like the best thing ever. If I'm not in the right mindset, I just can appreciate it. But yeah, if you ever get around to it, I'd be interested to know your opinion. But
I should. I don't know. I haven't. I think because if I'm ever in an Ace Attorney mood, I'd just rather replay a case from one of the older games or something. That's probably more how I consume it.
Yeah, and I think it also, going back to the movie for a second, it speaks to the dramatic force of the writing of the original game. The fact that I didn't get the same emotional kick from the ending of the movie. You know, the whole Polly thing and the pirate,
Yeah.
the big revelation that I got from the game. I mean, the tragic story of the man with the parrot and the fact that he lost his wife, and that's very tragic. I mean, it's very emotional. And I remember, in the game, I replayed the HD version like a couple of years ago, and I still got the very same emotional kick. And I didn't get that from the movie. I mean, the story is there; it's just very much copy and paste. But strangely enough, you would think it's a movie, so voices and actors, you will get more emotional, but it didn't work. So I think it speaks to the strength of the original writing. The fact that it
for
fits
sure.
So hard.
I wonder as well if like mentally or emotionally you're in a slightly different place where you play a game where I maybe like don't expect to be moved as much by games personally as other art forms. And like when there are emotional moments in these games and there are things that like shock or sadden you, like it's that much more of a surprise because you maybe it's quite unusual for something which is so fun to suddenly be able to deliver that. I mean, I think there's definitely some stuff in the third game which is like quite shocking in terms of like the plot developments and kind of the lengths people will go to like stay out of jail or the kind of
Get revenge.
Yeah, I mean it's like not to be too kind of sort of highfalutin about it. It's a surprisingly like full-bodied sort of study of evil, the third game, in terms of like how venomous, what it can do to sort of someone's soul, and what can kind of spill out from that. And I always, that's another thing I always loved about the game is it's kind of it's so sincere about this absolutely ludicrous fictional universe it's built with these mad characters, and it's so interested in like breaking down its own like fictional legal system. Like these games that they're about good versus evil, but they're very specifically about the relationship between a defense attorney and a prosecutor and what a legal system can achieve. And you're like, but there's also a parrot that you interrogate. It's like, and it's not embarrassed about any of that stuff, and it's not like hand-wringing or boring. It's just like totally sincere, and I think it really carries you through some like wild places. I wish like more kind of games sort of had that conviction to just drill into something super niche and weird in that way.
Yeah. It's like by the end of the first one, I mean, it starts off with your boss dying, getting murdered, and then like by the end, Phoenix is like struggling with confidence and that, and then her sister is like saying, "Oh, you can do it," and it's just so sincere. And then, like you say, but then it's like surrounded in there's just all these wacky characters.
Yeah, it's and it's like it's not accidental. Like there are clever people involved, but when you read their accounts of it, you get the feeling of kind of they set out to do the funny stuff and they set out to do the really killer mystery stuff, and it so happens that they also end up making what I hold up as one of the best video game stories, narratives that I've played. So but it's hard. It is also quite hard to see what the lessons are to take from this, because in terms of like, if you were making a massive, complicated RPG, it's quite I don't know what I would learn from Ace Attorney to capture some of that magic. Whether it's just so tied into this specific world, these specific characters, this visual novel adventure form, I don't know. It's a real such an oddity.
But since we mentioned it, I mean, I can't ignore that game, Ghost Trick.
Right.
I mean, if anyone doesn't know it, I mean, Ghost Trick was like the new kind of property direction which Shu Takumi wanted to work in. So he tried this kind of like, I would say, puzzle game, maybe sort of, the mix between puzzle game and an adventure with the kind of similar narrative. I mean, in that wacky sense and also dramatic sense as Ace Attorney. And when I played it, I distinctly remember I went through several emotions. I mean, at the beginning, I was a bit turned off because I was expecting something more similar gameplay-wise to Ace Attorney.
Right.
So I kind of got disinterested. Then I thought, okay, let's give it another go. And went back to it like a couple weeks later, and I really got into it. Got into the story. I think I was about 75% through when I got completely stuck on a puzzle, and I was just like, you know what? I'm going to use the solution online, the walkthrough online, and just enjoy the story and just plow through it until the ending because I'm bored by all these puzzles. But as for the narrative, I think it was pretty strong. I mean, I liked it, but gameplay wise, I think it could have used a little more work and refinement. What do you think?
Yeah, it is very different. I think it's. I think it's kind of brilliant in terms of like how it tells its story through, like, almost in the background of these puzzles. You know, you're this ghost and this sort of disembodied presence that can, because you have no body, like, you can be in lots of different places, and you know, it can start stitching the story together that way. Like, it kind of, you know, it tells, it's almost like an accidental story that you're not meant to sort of see, but you kind of happen to be there. And I mean, the actual puzzles, which, you know, is kind of you're trying to avert someone's death by using objects. I always refer to it as kind of a reverse Final Destination, where you have all these domestic objects and you have to line them up to save a life rather than take a life. And, like, the puzzles themselves are, like, they're fine. But I actually thought the idea of, like, how much story there was and how it kind of emerged quite, like, organically. Like, you know, there are dialogue scenes where, you know, there's text boxes, which are like Ace Attorney. But there's also just a lot of, like, watching characters go about their everyday lives or interact. And from that, you kind of glean what's going on. I think, like, yeah, I think it's, like, weirdly quite a sophisticated bit of storytelling. And, like, I definitely, like, it makes me sort of sad that, you know, as much as I love Ace Attorney and I love Ace Attorney games written by Shu Takumi, this was so different and interesting. Like, kind of a shame that he's, like, back in the Ace Attorney mines a bit. You know, like, I would love to know what the deal is there. Because he's, at this point, he's sort of, you know, he's got to be, like, one of their, like, longest serving kind of game creators there. Like, he's been there a long time, sticking with this. I mean, he kind of came up in Capcom with most of the people who left to form Platinum. And, you know, so it must be quite strange to see all your peers leave and your boss leave, and then you sort of stay behind making your game again and again and again, and you occasionally get to make one ghost trick in those 20 years as well. So I would love to see what else he could kind of come up with. You know, I'd love to see Capcom give him a chance to work on something else. I used to think it would be really great if he actually left and went to Platinum, because while I love Platinum games, their stories are always absolute shit. And like, bring in like your narrative genius friend from Capcom to come and, like, make these worlds really pop. Is what I would do if I was in charge of Platinum, which I'm obviously not. So yeah, like, I love it. I'd love more of it, but I will take more Ace Attorney. I'm part of the problem, I guess. I'm, like, cracking the whip. I'm like, just make more games.
As long as he's working on Ace Attorney, you're fine.
Yeah, that's fine. That's absolutely fine.
Yeah. From what I remember, Ghost Trick basically tanked, did not do very well sales wise.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I don't think. Yeah, you could. And it was on. I don't know if it had like a second life because they put it on like iOS and maybe Android. So it's like still accessible and playable in that form.
at
But
least.
yeah, it was great. It had beautiful animation as well. Like it was really like highly produced for a DS game. Like I had, compared to Ace Attorney, it was like a big step up with all these little, like 3D animated characters and things. It's quite a thing.
But anyway, this is kind of related, but kind of unrelated. Nintendo, there's a lot of Nintendo DS games that need a second life. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
Step on it. Waiting for. Come on. That's
get the old Virtual Console. One of the best things on the Wii U, and it's a short list, is the DS Virtual Console stuff is actually like the emulation's really nice on the Wii U tablet because you can hold the tablet whichever way it is, horizontally, vertically, I don't know, and play games with the touch screen and everything like that. And I'd love them to do that on Switch as well because functionally they could. The Switch can do everything it needs to do to make that work. DS has got just too good a library, like so much weird stuff, so many. And we talk about this on that page quite a lot as well. It's just this like with Nintendo now committing to this kind of console, which is basically a handheld and home console in one. It feels like they're not gonna tap into their handheld craft anymore. Like everything they make leans towards more the home console experience. And like this was a company where half their people used to make these games. They were masters of the form of like taking these huge licenses and these big characters from games and finding smaller, weirder ideas. And we don't get a lot of that. We get amazing games. Like I'm not complaining about the Switch output at all, but what does happen to the Ghost Tricks and the Phantom Hourglasses and the Spirit Tracks of this world? I don't know. I sort of miss that, and I don't think it's just nostalgia speaking. Like I really think like there's just too much craft to throw away.
Yeah, it's true that they had great craftsmanship. I mean, going back to Super Mario Land to more recent times, they had some great developers working on stuff, and the WarioWare series. I mean, it came on the Switch, but still, it's basically just a mobile thing. It just that's the way it was created. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, personally, I'm very, very sad that there's almost no way to play any of the adventures developed by Sing. I don't know the Ching, the
Sing,
code. That because Odal Dusk. I mean, that's I would love to play that. Even a slightly remastered version, whatever, slightly HD. Who cares?
As long as I have my language, I love that game.
As long as I have,
That's a good point, though, right? That's one of the games I've never played, and I've always wanted to play it, but it's like. If
you can't,
you try and find that on dig out your 3DS, try and find a copy of it. And,
that's a whole. That's like they're probably if like Layton and Phoenix Wright were like two of the big things. Sing's games were like absolutely like another huge strand when I was on the mags. Hotel Dusk, Last Window, another Code. Those games were so cool. Like they sold like no copies, but they were just amazing atmosphere, kind of mood pieces. It's tragic. It is. R.I.P. Sing.
Well, just one very last thing, but just for fun. What's your also for you, Jesse, if you want? You're more like a personal connection with the Phoenix Wright series. Any personal anecdote? I mean, except for the Shutakumi stalking thing, of course. But yeah, anything else that comes to mind? Kind of weird, anything?
I mean, a bit of an oddity. I've my wife when I first met her. We didn't meet at because of Ace Attorney or anything like that. We did meet because of video games, but that's another thing. For my birthdays and Christmas, she always draws me a card, and she always draws the pair of us kind of as video game characters, our sort of favorite video game characters, and she did one of us as Phoenix Wright and Maya. This really lovely image, and then when we did eventually got married, we had those printed out as our kind of I think they were sort of table decoration type things. So on my wedding day I got to see a very dashing image of myself as Phoenix Wright, which was very generous because I look fucking awful in a suit. I do not have the silhouette of Phoenix Wright at all. I'm more who's that big lawyer? Is it Grossberg? I've got powerful Grossberg energy. That's in terms of something kind of that I affectionately ties me to the series. That would be it.
Oh my god, that's so cool. But it's also you're Grossberg on your wedding day. I mean,
I wouldn't. I was being self-deprecating. I was full Grossberg
with the mustache and the hemorrhoids, especially.
Yeah. No hemorrhoid chat.
Okay,
that was. I kept that out of the speech.
Glad we cleared it up.
Yeah.
Jesse, anything on your side? Well, you're kind of an late starter, actually.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
This is where you reveal your Miles Edgeworth tattoo.
Yeah, I mean that was the right time. I think mine was that at one point I used as my ringtone on the phone the Phoenix Wright ringtone.
That's amazing.
On Nintendo DS, which I felt was incredibly meta, so I kind of went around saying, I got a ringtone from a character who has a ringtone in the game, blah blah blah. And I remember once it went off in the office. We're talking years ago, because ringtones, boomer moment. And everyone looked at me very strangely, you have a Nokia phone or something, one of those old Nokia bricks, because it's kind of like very old tone, old ringtones, and I was like, no, it's the new smartphone. It's a normal smartphone, but it's a ringtone from a character. And then I saw everyone looking at me strangely, and I said, okay, enough. All right, don't worry about it. Yeah.
I need to do that. I need to get that ringtone. Why have I not done that already? That seems like a very sensible thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's still my list of ringtones, but it's been on vibrate since I don't know, 2010 maybe. So who remembers the ringtones anymore? Yay, ringtones! Yes. Okay, that's it.
Okay.
Awesome.
All right.
Well, thank you so much for. Sorry, I don't know if you have an ending spiel, but I was going to say
an ending theme. I was going
to say thank you very much for having me on. I love talking about Ace Attorney, especially with a fan who clearly knows their stuff.
But thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome back anytime. And but I mean, where can people find you? Right, you should plug some of your stuff.
I do a weekly podcast with my friend and former colleague Samuel Roberts called The Back Page Podcast, a video games podcast. It's on where people get podcasts from, so if you would like to listen to that. We did a Phoenix Wright episode last year, I have further thoughts there. But yes, that's fun. I like doing it. I hope people like it. Yes, I'm on Twitter as well at Mr. Basil _pesto, which is just inane bullshit. As is the case on Twitter. So yes.